Do it live. All right, what's going on, everybody? My name is Geoff STHVI alongside my main man, Ant Latino. You might know him as the odds fellow. You might know me as the old man who bets. Perhaps you've never heard of either of us, and you're wondering what the hell are we doing in the 1:37 p.m. feed. Well, we're two guys that love sports and data and try to churn out profits. So far, we're doing pretty okay at that. After a 5-1 week last week, we moved to, 37-15-1 on the season. That is indeed profitable. We're walking through the divisional round this week. We got 4 games. Going to be good ones, some sharp lines, but we're trying to, again, take that data angle and churn out some profits. I see we got some comments already asking Chiefs and the Bills. I promise you we will get there. But first, Ant, talk to the good people. How we doing? Great day for a great day.
Great day for a great day. Winning Wednesday, as I like to refer to. You can throw a hashtag in front of that. You can have some fun. There's a giant NBA slate that I got to dig into later, so I'm going to have my fun with that because, it's all the sport happening at once, but we got to talk NFL playoffs, wildcard weekend, the divisional round. You guys, thank you for joining. New, old, hope you guys listen to the podcast and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts as well. Short-term, high volatility investments. Keep dropping things into the chat. We obviously see the YouTube ones on StreamYard really easily, so we'll keep our eyes on those, like Simon's questions about Chief or Bills. We're going to get to that. If you guys are in the Twitter, I'll try to keep that up, and they're a little harder to see sometimes for us and on delay, but I'll try to keep that feed up so we can see them there as well. So again, thank you for joining. Keep the questions coming, and we're gonna have a little fun. So where do you want to start? You want to start with the painful recap and how I was maybe, my heart was ripped out, maybe?
Yeah, let's start there. That feels good. I love a good sob story to get us going. We can only go up. Up.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Well, I don't even think I'm going to watch football this weekend. I mean, who's actually playing? Like, do we care? Do we care about the playoffs?
And yes, we do. And the people watching also care. I get it. You're a Cowboys fan and it stings. I'm a Patriots fan and it stings. But we have sports to do. We can't just give up when our team decides to roll over and or just have a classic Cowboys meltdown in the final drive.
Yeah, sometimes
it's
you
not
just
as
run
bad.
out of time. Sometimes you run out of time.
What's worse? Hot seat here. Running out of time with Dak Prescott or fumbling that extra point with Tony Romo?
I think running out of time because hot gut reaction feel, you should be able to correct that and have it in your control a little bit more. Romo thing, complete fluke, weird, should have never probably happened either, but at least it was something that you didn't put yourself in that dumb position, right?
Sure. Yeah, I get it. And hey, you lost in a painful close game. I lost in an absolute smackdown.
Which I would love to hear from people there. What's worse too? Because I don't know. Like I don't know. I think you're probably distraught either way. I think the frustration of getting just whacked, is probably worse. But I don't know. What about you? Would you rather lose in a close fashion and do something boneheaded to push it over the finish line?
Yeah, I don't know. Getting smacked, at least you're like, all right, we were the worst team today, and there's less what ifs. But being a Patriots fan, it was 33-3. I'm like, well, we came back from 28-3, baby. So I was still sitting there with a little too optimism. My roommates almost disowned me. I told them to fuck themselves multiple times. They were all on the Bills, and a great bet. So shout out to them for getting it right, regardless of my fandom. But
well, look,
anyway, enough heartbreak, right?
For that weekend to me was all leading into it, and I think you and I bucked the trend a little bit with some of our picks and just looking more purely at the data and the season it was itself. But everybody wanted to talk about the underdog trends, like just how profitable underdogs were in wildcard weekend the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years. What you did if you teased underdogs through some key numbers and how that was even more profitable because so many underdogs covered outright plus the tease cover. That didn't matter, right? You had 5 home teams and favorites going 5-1. Straight up and against the spread. The lone loss being that Cowboys-Niners game, which was probably one of the shorter lines, sitting at 3, and probably one of the toughest matchups on paper. So maybe not all that surprising, right, that we had such a discrepancy in those wildcard games.
Yeah, for sure. And, shout out to us one time for looking at that trend and saying that doesn't matter at all this weekend because we're handicapping these games, not the last 5 years. So I feel good about that.
Oh, yeah.
But we got 4 games this weekend, Ant. Should we dive in?
Let's dive. Let's
I think we've
dive
got at
full
least three
head
or
first.
four best bets coming up for you here.
Correct.
Like we did last week, a little less scripted than usual. Usually we have all of our talking points written out, but we wanted to just go a little bit live, a little more discussion, a little bit more data in front of us. Let's come to some conclusions, and I think we're gonna run that back. So, what do we got? 4 p.m. Saturday. I'm gonna be in Florida at a bachelor party, hopefully sitting down at a bar somewhere with my
It
bets locked in on Wednesday.
feels like a group bet that the bachelor party has to throw in. Those are always fun.
Yeah, for sure. And we've got some smart individuals on this bachelor party. It's a bunch of doctors, so I'm going to be the stupid one out there. But that's okay. What do they know about sports, right? Hopefully a lot because we could use that brain power. But nonetheless, 4 p.m. Saturday. I cannot wait. Going to be a great slate of games. What is that first one? That's going to be Tennessee and
Correct.
Cincinnati,
That is
correct?
Cincinnati at Tennessee in the 4:30 Saturday slot.
Yeah, and we're looking at Tennessee minus 3.5 at home, coming off a bye. Cincinnati riding as high as possibly can. Just dismantled and covered the Bengals. That was one of our wins last week. We appreciate that. Was a little closer than anticipated at the end, but this is an interesting line. I expected a little bit more than 3.5, I think, especially with that week of rest. But I don't know. This is a Titans team that we've seen the good and the bad. They lose to the Jets. They beat some of the best teams in the league. Who are we going to get this week? What do you think?
The little Jacqueline Hyde. I mean, the interesting thing that's still floating around out there is what type of push you're going to get from Derrick Henry. How much, will he be back in the mix? Health status, right? You'd assume a lot of that's factored in the line. To your point, that would probably lean towards me thinking the line would tick up even higher at opening, which it didn't. But, all things being considered here, I think, Tennessee comes into this matchup, interestingly enough, as probably the worst team statistically left sitting around in the playoffs. They were really only trailed the Vegas Raiders that they played last week, and like you said, almost survived, right? The beneficiary of a couple tight calls and a Raiders team that got down and then couldn't find the red zone, right? So one thing that jumped out to me just as I was looking at this is, again, the Raiders couldn't convert, right, in that red zone. But when you look at this Tennessee team, they're sitting at 63.93% in terms of red zone efficiency, converting once they are in the red zone to the good old 7-point TD. And, I think that's good for what's the number, ninth in the league, sixth in the league, right? So, right off the bat, will Tennessee come out and convert a little bit more? They've at least proven statistically that they can do that at a higher clip than the Raiders.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think something that's perhaps underrated, and I was surprised even looking at the data this week of this Titans defense, I thought was an absolute sieve, and it looks like they're not, right? We're looking at DVOA here, which is essentially a way to measure a team's efficiency by comparing success on every single play to a league average. So we're looking at percentage better or percentage worse than league average. It's a stat that we use from Football Outsiders week in and week out. Defense overall here for the Titans is number 19. Number 12 going up against the Bengals, who's number 19. The Bengals defense we knew wasn't great. But I was surprised to see the Titans defense at that, not top 10, not elite by any means, but in previous years, that's been the glaring hole on their squad. And here they are fighting and with a defensive advantage coming into this week.
And even a little bit better, because I know we've been talking a lot about weighted, just so you can look at some of the things that were happening later in the year as the schedule became more relevant, as the roster became more relevant, and that defense got even better. Right, jumping from kind of 12th overall, on a normal DVOA standpoint to 8th overall in terms of weighted. So that's another good trend, right, with just how they kind of finished up down the stretch. I think their secondary is actually even getting a little bit healthier late in the season into the playoffs. So, I think that's a good place to target, right? What kind of Titans defense do you get? And on the other side of the coin, for kind of a mediocre Bengals defense, this is definitely a more efficient offense than the Raiders had.
Yeah, for sure. And looking at that weighted versus not. So again, for you guys listening, DVOA is looking at season long. Weighted DVOA is looking at just like recency bias, essentially, not favoring early season games as much as late season games. So a little bit better accuracy of how teams are performing today. The defense there for the Bengals, number 19 overall, 24th on weighted. So they've only been decreasing, and allowing 26 points, was it, to the Raiders? I mean, I don't know. I don't think the Raiders were that complete of a team. We faded them multiple times. I think they overperformed hard, and it was great to get that cover on a pretty strong line last week. But I think matchups like that, I think the Titans are that much better than the Raiders, and I think it's a small line, but it feels like a pretty powerful line to me. And we look at the offense here, right? Interestingly enough, we've got the Tennessee offense has not gotten any better, right? They lost Henry. They were 20th overall. Now they're 21st. But we get Henry back this week, and they have been jiving a little bit in the last couple of weeks. I feel like Devontae Foreman has really established himself as a Derrick Henry light, and then you got A.J. Brown coming back, obviously wildly important. Julio scored his first touchdown, 2 weeks ago? Which, about time, my man. Welcome to the NFL season.
We know he's allergic to the red zone. That goes back to his Atlanta days.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But I don't know, man. I'm feeling pretty good about this. It's interesting, right? Because we look at yards per play, we look at points per play, all pretty close here. We've got the yards per play advantage on offense goes to the Bengals, 5.8 versus 5.1. Defense, a little bit of a lean towards the Titans, 5.5 versus 5.4. So, it's one of those things that it's very, very close. Weighted DVOA overall, 14th versus 13th. But I'm looking at the DVOA to spread ratio, a 3% difference, and it's a 3.5 point line. Like that is pretty strong. Usually you're getting a 3.5 point line with like a 6 to 8 percentage point difference, not 3. So while the yards per play, points per play is, I think, pointing towards the Bengals, that DVOA to spread analysis, which has been, knock on wood, but pretty profitable for me these last few weeks in terms of judging line strength, screams Titans to me. And because of that, I think I'm going to lock in Titans minus 3.5.
Well, hey, let me give you a little trend to make you feel better that I was able to find on the good old gambling Twitter sphere. And this comes from CBS Sports HQ, which I believe you've done your fair share of work with the CBS boys.
Indeed.
Mike Vrabel and the Titans on 8+ days of rest, which this falls into just with the way their previous game plus the bye hits. Straight up and against the spread, 8-0, 29.6 points per game, giving up opponents point per game of 10.9. Good for a plus 18.7 points per game differential. That is undefeated, straight up and against the spread, and 18.7 greater than 3.5.
And you just made me a very happy man. Hopefully they can get it done. And I don't know. I feel good about it. I feel good about the Titans, which it always feels terrible to say that. But
let me take you on a ride to one more other official here. So I think we're going to lock in the Titans minus 3.5 for you.
Yeah.
Another spot I actually like is the over. So I love a good Tennessee Titans over. I'm still kicking myself at how the Raiders Bengals game didn't go over, and I'll tell you why, because there was 8 field goals.
Oh man, that stinks, dude. That stinks. No doubt.
And we still almost got there. Thing hit 45 on a line that ranged anywhere between 48 and 49.5. So I had 49.5 on the show. I grabbed some 48.5 later on. Again, at the 48.5, one of those field goals converts, and you go over at 49, right? Obviously, the 49.5, the early lean would have missed there, but that's one of 8 that we're talking about. 4 of those were from 30 and in. We had field goals of 30, and then 3 from 28 yards, meaning those teams were inside the 20.
Yeah, that's tough. Anyway, that's tough.
So let's start there, right? So last week in that Raiders game, right, offensively, a team that's not as good, probably not as good defensively as the Titans. But again, keying in on what that Cincinnati defense can do against a Tennessee offense and what a Tennessee defense can do against a Cincinnati offense. I think game script wise here, if the Titans get a lead and get ahead, you're going to have Joey Burrow trying to play catch up, trying to run and gun. They don't run the ball well. They want to throw the ball. You saw that during the Raiders game. So those 8 field goals combined with what I think game script wise happens in this one, when you look at both those defenses, I pointed out the red zone scoring. Tennessee should be able to convert at a much higher clip than the Raiders did. They should be able to convert at a higher clip than the Bengals do. The Bengals come in at red zone scoring efficiency of 57.9. Again, the Titans pretty high at 6th in the league at 63.9, almost 64%. These defenses aren't, very strong, right? 19th overall for Cincinnati, weighted of 24th, as we mentioned. Tennessee at 12th, weighted down to 8th. But one good thing that I think stands out on the Tennessee side, even though that defense is better than probably Cincinnati's face, it's better than the Raiders defense, is the Tennessee pass rush win rate is actually pretty low. So again, in a game script where Tennessee's getting behind, wants to take advantage of a bad Cincinnati offensive line, that's not really their strong suit, right? They're better against the rush from a defensive metric standpoint and from a pass rush win rate standpoint. So they come in at 39% pass rush win rate, which is that pressure the amount of times they're winning at the line of scrimmage to get to a quarterback, right? Beating the offensive lineman. That's 21st in the league compared to their ability to stop the run, which is sitting there ranked at 4th. So, again, if they're not getting that pressure and can't completely get there, I do think this thing will tick back up. I think you're getting a little bit of the playoff push down here on people seeing where some of these numbers landed last week, with more unders probably coming in and sitting at 47. I'm happy to go over that before it jumps to any other key numbers.
Yeah, and question for you, Ant, and this is I don't think I sent you this trend yet, but I found it through the Point Spread Weekly from VSiN, a nice little publication that they put out. How many points do you think the Bengals are going to score?
So let's see. If this total is sitting at 47 and they are 3.5, you probably put them anywhere between 20 and 24.
Okay. Interesting, right? So since 2002, the offensive potency, I'm reading this word for word. The offensive potency of the road team typically controls the total result. When a road team in the divisional round scores 24 points or more, the over is 26-5. When the road team fails to reach 18, so that's a touchdown difference, the under is 24-7. So you're right there, 20-24. I mean, that I
gave you the good number, right? I knew what I was doing.
Yeah, well done. But I agree.
Look,
and trends,
I thought trends, because I mentioned these to you too. There's a number of trends going the other way, working against me in this stage.
Of course.
Which again, I like to look at. It's always a nice boost for me. It makes me feel more comfortable. But when I see them going some way the extreme that they are this way, it's almost like where's the regression coming from?
Yeah, and even looking at just the under is 4-1 in their last 5 games. Of course, this is without Henry. They were positive towards the over before that. 6-2 at home, or 2-7, excuse me, at home towards the under. But again, without Henry, that was interesting. But even looking at that 18 to 21 points on these unders, the only one that went over was when Houston scored 25 points. The underdog didn't get there any other time for them to get there, which is interesting. But they also played some pretty shitty teams in that stretch, so that's okay. Anyway, we spent way too much time talking about one game. Picks here, we got the odds fellow on the over, myself on the Titans. You joining me on 3.5, or that's still a game time decision?
Heavy lean, still a game time decision.
All right, so we've got 2 official plays, not 3 so far as we head into game 2. And this is going to be, division, just like a historical rivalry here, and one that in recent times San Francisco has been coming out ahead, at least in the playoffs, heading up to cold Lambeau Field. I don't have the weather report, but it was like 2 degrees in New York a few days ago, and it's further north than we are, so I'm assuming it's going to be a little chilly out there. What do we think?
Lambeau Field. But I was saying this on a podcast the other night. I think everyone overreacts a little bit to the cold. What matters is the wind and the wind chill, right? Low temperatures don't always translate to a ridiculous game environment, and these teams are so much better prepared. The fields are so much better taken care of, right? We're not probably talking about ice bowl conditions. So does it matter? I don't know. One thing I love in this matchup, which we want to get into, is San Francisco's ability to run the ball, right? And we talked about this a little bit in the Cowboys game, how Shanahan approaches things, what he can do with that stable of backs. I mean, Deebo Samuel might be the most terrifying guy when he lines up in the backfield. I don't know how we couldn't tackle him.
Wow. And last weekend with Deebo, I had, just took a flyer on one of the Caesars Sportsbook boosts where he would have over 49 yards receiving as well as over 49 yards rushing.
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd be sweating and not hit the receiving yards when the other one hit easy. It was like 65 yards rushing.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of a big buck snow whammy, type scenario. Anyway, back to you. What were you saying?
No, but I think, one thing that stands out a little bit, right, even with the weather, that could play into San Francisco's hands, right, what they want to do. One thing that jumped out to me in the data was just how bad the Green Bay defense is ranked. Now, they didn't feel bad throughout most of the season. It's definitely a sum of all parts defense. They play better when they all are together, healthy. But you have to imagine Rodgers keeping that defense off the field is also a big part, kind of akin back to some of the Cowboys teams I watched and loved with Tony Romo, where the defense was so bad statistically, but they were never on the field because DeMarco Murray and the Cowboys offense was controlling the clock, right? And I think that's a lot of what you get with Green Bay. They come in ranked 15th against the pass, 28th against the rush, 22nd overall. That's actually worse than the Bengals.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. That 28th against the rush, you think about what the Niners have done so well against teams like, the Rams obviously comes to mind, where they were just throttling the run. They've got three backs there. And, with Jimmy G nursing, a right ligament tear in his shoulder, I think that's why the line moved to 6. You got Joey Bosa as well with a concussion, also moved to 6. But I still think that's a little bit too much space here. One thing that I loved is looking at teams that are left that have a top 10 offense and defense by DVOA. There's only 2 of them. One of them are the San Francisco 49ers. I feel like we're still getting a little bit more of like the hangover effect of the Niners, right? They started slow. Everybody was hurt. Then they got healthy. But to look at their weighted offense of 4 and their weighted defense of 5 is pretty insane to me. It's not something when you watch this team you don't necessarily think about. They put up like 23-16 last week, right? And it's like, oh, they got lucky, whatever you want to say. But it feels like this team is for real. And I think the craziest part for me, Ant, is if you look at George Kittle's stats in those last 4 games, which they've all been big wins, he hasn't had more than 30 yards in any of them. It's like one of your biggest playmakers isn't even getting the rock. I mean, that is interesting
But if you're watching the games, he's lining up and he's blocking better than most tight ends in the league. And that's eye test
100%.
type stuff. That's stuff that's not in the box score. It's stuff that shows up in the running game. Even the receivers getting physical downfield. So I do think it's a really interesting matchup. Obviously two guys from kind of the same coaching tree too. So, how does that factor into stuff? I'd be curious. I should go look at some head-to-head matchups here. But it is actually a rematch from earlier in the year, and I don't know how much stock you put in that. It was early on, right? It goes back to week 3. Green Bay beat them, kind of outlasted San Francisco 30-28. For those of you that don't remember that game, San Francisco actually took the lead with under a minute left and probably just left too much time on the clock because they scored with about 43 seconds left, and somehow Aaron freaking Rodgers, maybe the league's MVP, marched Mason Crosby, who didn't have a great year, down the field, and they kicked a field goal with 2 seconds left to win that game. So, that game was tight, and I think you're getting a lot of points here, right? That thing did close at San Francisco -3 early in the year, a total at 50.5. So it slightly went over, and obviously Green Bay covered and won outright. So interesting, but 6 feels heavy to me. It feels like a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. And, we look at yards per play, we look at points per play. Offensively, San Francisco actually has the yards per play advantage, 6.1 versus 5.2, which is surprising. Defensively, San Francisco has the advantage, 5.1 versus 5.4. Also interesting. And, looking at my DVOA versus spread analysis here, this one likes the Green Bay, actually. Which I don't love. It's a 9.7. Well, actually, that's a bold-faced lie. I was reading this directly wrong.
We're back. Baby.
This is one you could go either way, man, because it actually has the Niners as the superior team, both weighted and unweighted. So for this to be at 6, in theory, you'd say this is an incredibly strong line. The last one that I remember where DVOA was higher than the underdog was better than the favorite, the New England Patriots, and they lost 47-13 or whatever the hell it was. So that is a little bit of a cause for concern to me. But I do think this line is inflated because of potential injuries at 6. I love the previous matchup, and this is one that I'm going to buck against my DVOA versus spread. And I talk about the range. It is in like the sharp range, even at this line. And again, inflated. If it should be, I have that it should be between 2 and 3. And if you put it at 3, it would be a fantastic line for the Niners. So I think it's inflated because of injuries, the yards per play, the points per play, the DVOA advantage. Again, I don't like going against the DVOA versus spread analysis, but this is one I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the Niners +6.
Yeah, look, and we've heard so much about home field advantage, Lambeau, Aaron Rodgers. Like, they haven't gotten it done in the playoffs, too, from a narrative standpoint, frankly, over the last few years. They've fallen up short. A lot of those were in NFC championship games, but some of them at home. And I just don't think, even with the injuries concerns, I'll take the inflated lines because I think you get a healthy enough Jimmy G. I think they're playing that up a little bit. The Bosa thing is a little bit concerning defensively because obviously that's a big piece. But you looked at what they did, San Francisco post Bosa, and even another injury on that defensive front. After those guys went out, they were still getting to Dak, and that was against a very good Cowboys offensive line as well. You have that with the Packers, but I think the sum of all the parts, the scheme from a Shanahan perspective, I still like. So I'm coming with here. Let's take +6 and run with it.
Yep. All right. Love it. +6. Go Niners. Of course. The huge caveat here, you have to watch those injuries. If Jimmy G's ruled out, this is all for naught. Even if Bosa is officially ruled out, you might see this come over 7. I don't know. I think it's already factored in. I don't think it'll move that much. But that also can be potentially misleading, that if it's already moved because of it and then it doesn't move after the official announcement out, you're like, oh shit, this is actually a strong line for the Niners. Yeah. Either way, I think it should require a reevaluation.
On to Sunday we go.
On to Sunday, baby. Sunday.
Another rematch.
We got 2 games. I mean, hell, this could be the game of the weekend.
Should be the early one. Yeah. I think, down to Tampa to see what Mr. Brady and the defending champs can do. Another game where back in week 3, like we just talked about with San Francisco and Green Bay, not really as close as the Green Bay San Francisco game. I think Rams handled it pretty well, 34-24. Probably the best Stafford game, a bit of a statement for him early in the year when you had MVP buzz for Matthew Stafford. 343 yards, 4 TDs, 134.0 rating. Tampa Bay was -1, total of 55 in that game.
Yeah, and Brady did throw a pick 6 at the end of that game, right, to put it out of reach. Or am I off on that?
I think you definitely may be correct. I'll pull up the box.
Yeah, so I think that 10 points might be a little inflated in terms of the final outcome. And we were talking with Fusini and Sharkey earlier in terms of like line scaling, and -1 to lose, and then now -3 or whatever it's at. Feels like it could be moving in the right direction for the Bucs. One thing that I thought was interesting, we talked about this last weekend, was when the Bucs have played an opponent twice, it's been very, very similar outcomes each time.
Right.
That was looking specifically at Atlanta. They won by 10+ both times. New Orleans, they lose by 9 both times. Carolina, they win by 26 and 24. We extrapolated that out to the Eagles, right? And where they only won by 6 the first time, but there was 2 touchdowns in 90 seconds for it not to be a blowout, which almost happened the second time as well. They got the ball back with a minute left, which would have blown the backdoor cover. But either way, they won by double digits. They covered. So that was the handicap there. We look at what's going to happen with the Bucs this time. When is Tom Brady not at his best? When pressure is high. Can the Rams bring that pressure? Absolutely. Are they banged up at wide receiver? Absolutely. Is Leonard Fournette back? I don't know. But that pressure and kind of the it's already happened once narrative concerns me. This is one that I don't think I'm going to have any action on. I think this is the toughest game of the week to predict. Half of me wants – I love betting on Tom Brady more than anybody on the planet, right? He's got a 58.
What's the cover rate? Do you know the cover rate by heart?
I'm not factoring in this season, but it was 58.3 coming into the year. The surest thing other than betting on Money Mayweather, right? And, look at DVOA here. It's close. You've got Tampa Bay at number 1 overall on offense, weighted. That's still number 1, which I think is super, super interesting because this is after people went down. So they are still getting resourceful. We're getting more Gronk. We're getting more Cameron Brate. O.J. Howard was even in there a little bit last week. Mike Evans is still Mike Evans. And, Scotty Miller, I had over 7.5 yards on his longest reception. One catch for 8 yards. Man, that was a sweat. But, I think even with the injuries, this is a pretty deep team, obviously, next man up mentality. And, the Rams offense has floundered a little bit. They looked good with Cam Akers coming back last week. Oh, and somebody just pumping tunes here. Give me a second.
Love it. I love it. No, the Cam Akers thing was super interesting. He jumped back, honestly. So, when you tear an ACL like that, you assume the worst, right? You assume he's out. They had a good story on the broadcast saying that he told Stafford, "I'll see you in the playoffs. Just get us there." And Stafford was like, "Yeah, okay, cool." And
I love that. And defensively here, both very good as well. You've got the Rams at weighted number 6, and the Bucs at 12. So it's like slight advantage on the offensive side, at least data wise, for the Bucs, and slight advantage to the defensive side for the Rams. That's a bit of a wash. Yards per play, points per play. 6 and 6 on offense, 5 and 2, 5.2 and 5.2 on defense. Literally the exact same thing. So usually when that's the case, all things the same, I go with the underdog. But considering kind of line strength here, I think it does speak to the Bucs. But it's a 6% delta in terms of percentage and a -3 line. I think it should be like a 1 or 2 line, so this would be strong at 3+. But I don't know, man. It just feels too sharp for me to have any action. I think you're going to be sweating this one the entire game.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. This is one I'm just kind of excited to watch. Both of these teams kind of hit bad skits, during the season. The Rams were dysfunctional at times, finished strong, got the division win. Did they just take advantage of Arizona slipping up and San Francisco coming on too late? Maybe. I actually lean slightly over here. Not an official just yet. But I think one thing to point out on that concept that I talked a little bit about with the old dad bods and the brothers Sheesby, the Shark was on last night, which was phenomenal podcast show. We talked about the fact that in this game, if you guys remember back in week 3, it was 0-0 at the end of the first quarter. 0-0 at the end of the first quarter, and the game still sailed over the total. What I say, close out around 50 something.
Yep.
So do you get another slow start here? First half unders, are those profitable because of the way some of these teams start? So I lean over overall, but it might be one where you play it in game and see if you can get a little inflation similar to that regular season. Could be an interesting spot. And I agree with everything you said. It's just such a tight matchup, between the two teams. They're both so deep and really, kind of match out pretty statistically high, especially in terms of the NFC, if not the whole league.
Yeah, and I think that live point is really clutch, honestly. I think you could confidently take the live line on whoever doesn't score first.
Yeah.
Right? I think you'll get some pretty good space.
Good value.
At least.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look, you want to talk about value last night, and this is NBA, but it still applies, right? I saw somebody bet the Timberwolves at -1 overnight. I grabbed the Timberwolves at -2 in the morning because it was the best available to me. The line closed at 3.5. The Timberwolves won by 2. Geoff was at the game, live betting the Knicks because at one point they were down 12. He got a +6.5 live line. The Knicks went up from that 12-point deficit at one point. I got a Minnesota Timberwolves +3.5 live line plus a +165 money line. All of those things hit, or you could win or lose depending on what was going on. So just keep your eye on it. If you're serious about this stuff and have enough money on the line, there's hedging opportunities and there's ways to think about things.
Yeah, big time. And I think on that live point, it's important to have that number that you want coming into the game, right? To kind of quantify whether or not it is good value or not. So just think about that, obviously.
Yeah.
But anyway, so no official plays on that. You said you are taking a total, or that's still a lean?
Still a lean, but follow us on Twitter, at Old Man Who Bets and at The Odds Fellow. You might see some of those leans become officials. One more, baby. The last one. This is going to be, Sunday is superior in terms of game quality here. Or maybe not. Maybe they'll surprise us. But at least on paper, this is going to be an absolute thriller of a game as well. Buffalo versus Kansas City. Caesar Sportsbook had Buffalo +2 earlier today. I was seeing 1.5 everywhere else. Line shopping's important. I love the Bills here, man. I understand why, because I want to take the Chiefs. I want everything in me to say, grab the Chiefs. I want to see Mahomes in the Super Bowl again. I want to see KC dominance, at least competing, especially off a tough loss last year where they weren't healthy against a good Bucs team. But that line, right? Talk to the people about that line. That screams Bills all over the place.
Yeah, man. This is, I think, the sketchiest line of the weekend, perhaps. Yeah. In terms of line strength, at least DVOA versus spread analysis leans towards the Bills for sure. This is another funky one where looking at the season long, the Bills are better by 10% and underdogs. So again, you extrapolate that to the Pats, but it just feels like one of those things that Vegas was never going to give us a Chiefs home underdog in the playoffs. Just simply impossible. So, again, a little bit of art, a little bit of science, moving towards a little bit of my gut here. But, looking at some of these rankings, I said it earlier with the Niners, there's only 2 teams left that are top 10 in weighted DVOA on offense and defense. That's the Niners and the Bills, which I absolutely adore. And there's a huge discrepancy on defense between these two teams. We've got defense overall for the Bills, number 1. For the Kansas City Chiefs, number 24. That does shrink when you look at weighted. It's 3 versus 13, but that's still a pretty big gap. And I think when you look at offensively here, the offense for the Bills, 13th and 9th passing and defense, or passing and rushing. So pretty decent on both of those, where you're looking at 3 and 10 for this Kansas City offense. But more importantly, the pass defense for the Bills, number 1. So going against kind of the strength of Kansas City here as their passing game. I love that this secondary can match up very, very well against them.
Yeah, and you probably got to throw the first matchup out a little bit. I do think the game will be tighter than that. Still could be a bit of a track meet. That was 38-20 back in week 5. That was Buffalo going to KC. Obviously a revenge spot. The Chiefs were kind of reeling at the time too, which is another reason why I say I don't think you can put a ton of stock in it. Remember all the Chief funeral parties you went to of like Chiefs are dead, Chiefs won't make the playoffs, let alone win the division and almost get the number 1 seed. So the Chiefs are back. But is it too little too late? Are they just not deep enough? Is this the Bills' year? It's a really interesting narrative to me because these teams played in the AFC Championship last year, and you had Kansas City kind of flipping the script on them at that point. Again, why I mentioned the revenge factor.
Yeah.
They beat up on them at that time, 38-24, and I don't remember that game being too much in reach at that point. Casey was playing so well.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think like yards per play, points per play, love what we're seeing from the Bills here as well. Offensively, pretty much a wash. You got 5.8 versus 5.6, but defensively, the Bills defense is 1.2 yards per play better, which I think is huge. And again, this has been a Kansas City defense that's stepped up a lot lately. Very reminiscent of their Super Bowl run where they just overperformed hard, especially against that run. Look
at the weighted DVOA jumps from 24 overall to 13th from a pure defense standpoint, right? So that's probably the biggest discrepancy on the board between weighted and unweighted in some of these metrics.
Yeah, for sure. But nonetheless, I love the advantage of the yards per play. I love the DVOA advantage, and this is another one that I'm going to be going slightly against the DVOA versus spread. But it's the playoffs, baby. They're the sharpest lines of the year. Fortune favors the brave. So,
yeah,
doing a little bit of art, a little bit of science, going a little bit more with the art on this one rather than the science. But I locked it in earlier today at Bills +2, which I feel pretty good about.
I lean there with you. Nothing official for me. The other leans would probably be on the under. Overall, I think you're getting a slightly inflated number, especially because of what these two teams did last week, right? These are two high-powered offenses, and they beat up on teams that they had played before. I think the Steelers were no match. The Pats giving up that much to a motivated Allen offense and the Bills offense was surprising, but again, not impossible. So that thing's sitting at like 54.5, 55 right now. Could be first half under, maybe make that official. Lean Bills. And another one where I think you'll get good live value because I would never consider any team out of this, right? So it could be one where if I can get a team between, +6.5 to +8, after an early score or two and they're down 7 to 10 points and that's the live line I can get, probably something I jump on because I think both these games should be tight.
Yep, I love it. And one last question for you, Ant. So that's a lock on that game. I want to come back to this Bucs game for a second. I forgot to ask you a second ago. What do you make of the Rams coming off a Monday Night Football game, short week? Anything?
Yeah, it's important from a rest standpoint. That's really interesting. I mean, I think they've changed so much in the technology and the flights, but it is a rest disadvantage, which we can pull up real quick if I can try to get to it and see how they fared on the rest disadvantage or how if that mattered at all for them this year. But I don't put a ton of stock in it again because from a lines maker standpoint, you figure the odds makers have factored it in. Anything for you that jumps out on that?
Nah, I didn't even think about it, and then I thought about it, and I said, maybe that's interesting. Maybe it's not.
Yeah,
but
no, I think it is. I definitely think it is, but I think it's one of those things where we as bettors probably overthink it, because again, the odds makers are factoring it in, right? So that maybe that does factor into that Tampa Bay line strength that we talked about before, and maybe that's why it does seem a little bit more appealing because they are putting some stock in that. They have to travel, and they have the rest disadvantage, right? It's not even rest disadvantage at home. You got to get on a plane and go and prepare. But, hey, it's the playoffs, man. That's what they're built for.
Playoffs? You kidding me? All right. That's
Can we just play that on repeat?
Yeah, for sure. Let's edit that into the live stream. Playoffs? So we got a couple of official plays. We're coming off a 5-1 wild card weekend, which we're feeling great about. I am on the Titans -3.5. I am on the San Francisco 49ers +6 and the Buffalo Bills +2 locked in today at Caesars Sportsbook -110. And Ant, you are on. Take it away.
I am on the Bengals Titans over 47, which is your early Saturday game, and I am on the Niners +6. So I'm an all Saturday affair right now. I got to get to the Sunday party, so I got to work on that.
Yeah, right on. All right, guys. Well, thank you as always for listening. We're all about hot bets and cold beers. This will be, this always has been. It always will be for eternity. And this is short-term high volatility investments. Until next week.
Cheers all.